The book of Proverbs is basically a book of promises, right?
I'll make my own decisions. What a stupid thing to say. Lord, I need you every day.
Just like we talked about the book of Job and why it's canonical last week, we're going to talk about the book of Proverbs. We'll do Ecclesiastes next, since it's in our year of wisdom. We're going to do a lot of reading today, so get your reading glasses out if you're over 40. Strong's Concordance says that the word used here is mashal, which just means a proverb or a parable. Brown Driver Briggs expands on this. Proverb, parable of sentences constructed in parallelism, usually a Hebrew wisdom, but occasionally of other types. A proverbial saying, brief, terse sentence of popular sagacity. Prophetic figurative discourse. Similitude, parable. Poem of various kinds, the ode. The 3,000 pieces traditionally ascribed to Solomon. Didactic psalms. Sentences of ethical wisdom. Proverbs 10, 1 through 22:16, consisting of 376 couplets, chiefly antithetical. Proverbs are also considered maxims. Nowadays, I hear that word all the time. So, let's define maxim. Merriam-Webster says this: a general truth, fundamental principle, or rule of conduct. A proverbial saying. Oxford Languages says a short, pithy statement expressing a general truth or rule of conduct. Alright, I had to look up the word pithy because I didn't know what it meant. Let's talk about it. Merriam-Webster says this: consisting of or abounding in pith. Well, that didn't help much. Having substance and point. Tersely cogent. Oxford Languages describes it like this: of language or style, concise and forcefully expressive. This is what my CSB Apologetics Bible says. Proverbs consists of different collections of wisdom sayings. While several of these are associated with King Solomon, his exact role in their preparation is uncertain. Just a side note here, when he's writing the book of Ecclesiastes, which we will talk about, he says that he is the Koholat, which means the collector of sentences. And I think that's appropriate here, too. Let's keep that in mind. Solomon's interest in wisdom is clear from 1 Kings 4:29 through 34, which indicates that he authored 3,000 proverbs. It's likely that many of the proverbs in the book originated with Solomon, but given his interest in wisdom and the similarities between Proverbs 22:17 through 23:14 and a collection of proverbs from Egypt, it is also likely that some of the material in the book was collected by Solomon rather than authored by him. According to the statement in Proverbs 25:1, one of these collections was copied by the scribes of Hezekiah, and so our present book could not have been put into its present form until after 700 BC. Certain literary features make it likely that the book was compiled prior to the Babylonian exile. The literary forms designated by the Hebrew word translates proverb are considerably broader than what is conveyed by the English word proverb. They include concise sayings and riddles, as well as longer poems such as the alphabet acrostic describing the excellent woman in Proverbs 31, 10 through 31. Similar literary forms are found throughout the history of civilization and in virtually every culture. Apart from some explicitly theological material, for example, these Proverbs, the material in Proverbs seems to reflect the conclusions of people as they carefully observed the world in an attempt to identify the basic patterns that operate in life. According to Israelite thinking, the basis for such observations is the fact that God created the world and designed order into it, as Proverbs 3:19 through 20 and 8:22 through 31 make clear. Thus, the Israelites were able to recognize the legitimacy of wisdom that came from sources outside Israel, as is clear from passages such as 1 Kings 4:30 and 31, and from references to non-Israelites noted for their wisdom. The Israelites would have had no innate objection to accepting the observations of non-Israelites into their wisdom tradition. Let's talk about interpreting the Proverbs. Some have raised objections to material in Proverbs because it seems to command a certain behavior, but then commands a different, incompatible behavior elsewhere, or because it makes a general promise that the Bible appears to contradict or qualify elsewhere. Proverbs also makes what appear to be comprehensive statements that seem to be contradicted by the realities of life. For example, proverbs that promise long life to the wise and righteous, but a premature death for the wicked. An interpreter must be careful to interpret this material in a way that appropriately considers the nature of a proverb and the way its original audience would have understood it. Many objections reflect a failure to understand what a proverb is and how proverbs function in cultures that use them regularly. The types of sayings found in Proverbs reflect a way of thinking and teaching that has been largely abandoned in modern Western culture, which is where I am. Proverbs are general statements of truth rather than invariable promises or laws, and an individual proverb normally captures a tiny cross-section of truth rather than making a comprehensive statement about a topic. For example, a gentle answer turns away anger constitutes one component of the broader topics of using words wisely and dealing with angry people. I'm sure we've all seen this one in action. If I speak nasty to you, you're probably going to be on edge and ready to attack me back. But if I speak to you gently, it's going to tend to turn away your anger. Tend to. This single principle is one small piece of a much larger mosaic, and the task of the student is not only to put together the broader mosaic piece by piece, but also to learn to apply these principles skillfully to the complexities that one encounters in life. The goal of the wisdom in Proverbs is to develop skill in living according to the order that is embedded in God's creation. When a pair of proverbs seems conflicting or even contradictory, the first proverb moves the reader in a certain direction. Then the contrasting proverb provides a balancing principle to point the reader toward another dimension of the skill of living in a complex world. For example, Proverbs 26:4 says, "Don't answer a fool according to his foolishness, or you will become like him yourself." While the next verse says, "Answer a fool according to his foolishness, or he will become wise in his own eyes." The student of wisdom recognizes that encounters with a fool require responses appropriate to that particular situation. The student also recognizes that a variety of other approaches between these extremes may be the wise response, and the student's goal is to become the kind of wisdom craftsman who can frame the appropriate response no matter the situation he faces. I imagine we've all been in some kind of a situation like that right there, where you know that if you answer them according to their folly, that they're just going to blow it off and it's not going to do a thing. But there are situations where we know that if we respond to somebody, they might actually think it through instead. So these really aren't contradictory statements. Likewise, the ambiguity that often characterizes Proverbs reflects the same pedagogy and goals. The student of wisdom is challenged by the ambiguity to explore the possibilities for understanding the proverb along with the variety of situations in which the principle appropriately applies. The ambiguity also promotes ongoing reflection as to the legitimate limits for applying the principle. While the book addresses a wide variety of issues, it gives considerable attention to matters such as the contrast between the wise person and the fool, the importance of virtues such as diligence and self-control, the importance of using words wisely, warnings about sexual immorality, the responsible use of money, priorities, and advice about proper behavior in a variety of social settings. Most proverbs deal with the general and the typical, but their goal is to equip people with the skills to apply wisdom to the particular experiences of life. My NIV Archaeological Study Bible has this to say. Many modern scholars consider the notion that Solomon had anything to do with the writing of Proverbs to be implausible and treat the book as entirely a product of post-exilic era. In fact, however, there is no good reason to dismiss Solomon's association with Proverbs. Similar compilations from the ancient Near East date from Solomon's time, the 10th century BC, or much earlier. We're going to look at that article that it refers to in just a minute. Solomon's era was the most prosperous and sophisticated in Israelite history. If any period was likely to have produced works of wisdom literature, it was precisely this one. The book of Proverbs includes the following themes. Wisdom. The predominant motif of the extended discourse in 1:1 through 9:18 is that of two women, wisdom and folly. Wisdom is a personification of God's attribute of wisdom and ultimately stands for God himself, while folly represents false gods vying for Israel's devotion. The truth expressed is that there can be no real wisdom apart from God. To fear God is to begin on the path of knowledge, understanding, or insight. The other theme, practical living. Proverbs presents principles for godly living and has much to say about wealth, work, giving, and matters of the heart. The range and scope of its subject matter encompass nearly every aspect of life. This is that article that it referred to a minute ago. Proverbs 1. The ancient Near East has yielded a great deal of what scholars call wisdom literature. Texts that instruct the reader about life, virtue, and social interaction or reflect upon profound issues. The instructive or didactic texts like Proverbs were typically written with a boy or young man, my son, as the implied reader. These straightforward texts, exhorting the reader to right behavior, concern issues like personal morality, work ethics, career choice, or peer respect. The reflective texts like Job are addressed to a more mature reader, one who acknowledges that the world is not always as it should be. They lament societal ills and wrestle with complex issues. These categories are not mutually exclusive. Ecclesiastes wrestles with life's unfairness and perversity, but also instructs the reader. We could classify Proverbs as the workbook for a beginning or undergraduate course, with Ecclesiastes being an advanced or graduate school text. Wisdom texts may address the reader directly, as do Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, or have a narrative structure like Job. Wisdom texts may be presented as prose, like most of Ecclesiastes, or poetry, like most of Job. Didactic texts often employ simple two-line maxims and parallelisms, while reflective texts are typically more complex in structure, as in Job's more problematic poetic discourse. Other nations also had wisdom literature. A few examples from the ancient Near East. Egypt, the instruction of Vizier Ptah-hotep of the 5th dynasty, from 2500 to 2350 BC. An aged counselor instructs his son in how he should conduct his life. The instruction for Merikari, 10th dynasty, 2106 to 2010 BC. A pharaoh, apparently Keti III, initiates his son in the principles of proper and effective ruling. This text, reflecting the social turmoil of the first intermediate period, asserts that Merikari must earn the respect of the nobles through just governance in order to maintain his hold on the throne. The protests of the eloquent peasant. Oldest copy dates to the 12th dynasty, 1963 to 1786 BC. A peasant who has been defrauded of his goods pleads for justice from high officials, eventually winning his case and gaining a high position for himself. The text reflects upon the nature of justice and the importance of eloquent speech. The instruction of Amenemope. Oldest copy dates to between the 10th and 6th centuries BC. This text, which is remarkably similar to Proverbs 22:17 through 24:22, includes an introduction and 30 sections of teaching on wise behavior. Mesopotamia. Akkadian proverb texts. These writings contain pithy adages and maxims of the sort found all over the world. For example, one proverb states that an enemy army never departs from a city whose weapons are weak, similar to the Roman proverb, "If you want peace, prepare for war." Counsels of Wisdom. This Akkadian book of practical advice also addresses the reader as "my son." Examples of advice include a warning not to marry a prostitute and an admonition that the steward of a ruler's property should not give in to covetousness. The Babylonian Theodicy, 1100 to 1000 BC. A cynical sufferer enters into a dispute with a man who defends traditional notions of wisdom. The text originally included 27 stanzas, each with 11 lines, but not all remain intact. This writing is often compared to Job. There are, in fact, both clear similarities and sharp differences between the two. The Book of Ahikar, found on a 5th century Aramaic papyrus but set in Assyria and possibly composed originally in Akkadian. This text describes how Ahikar overcame the adversity of a scheming and ungrateful nephew, avoided execution on false charges, and proved himself to be the wisest man of his age. The story was translated into Armenian and Arabic, and the apocryphal book of Tobit alludes to it. The motif of the wise man who triumphs over adversity appears repeatedly in the Bible as well. We cannot deny that such similarities exist. The Israelites did not live in cultural isolation. At the same time, it would be a mistake to treat the biblical texts as just another version of ancient wisdom. In grandeur of scope, internal complexity, and theological profundity, the biblical texts of Proverbs, Job, and Ecclesiastes are in a class by themselves. And as always, thank you so much for being here today. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button right there and click the bell so you can get notifications. And if you wouldn't mind, hit that like button for me. And I will see you next time.
So let his
Mary.
love shine through in everything we do. It's all for love. He commanded above all things to love the Lord with all our mind, heart, soul, and strength for all of time. Give your heart to the one who was there at the start. We were made to love, we were made to give. The reason why we're here, the reason why he gave us life. We were made to show the love of Christ. We know this is why we're here, this is why he gave us life. So let his love shine through in everything we do. It's all for love. Greater love has no one but this, that he lay his life down for a friend. Build each other up, don't cease, it's never enough. And now that he's washed me clean, I want to follow where He